The real threat when it comes to India is obviously Beijing. It's China, and China is a much more powerful nation. Its hard power, if its hard power score is about three and a half times that of India, maybe even 4 times that of India. So China is a significantly more powerful nation. And if you launch 5 such missiles, each carrying 10 warheads, it's going to be essentially impossible to defend against that. Excuse me, ballistic missiles and MIRV technology is supposed to do harm, not good. It's not a solar panel that we have developed. It's an offensive technology. On the 11th of March this year, India announced that it had tested the Agni-5 ballistic missile equipped with MIRV technology. And this is going to be a big game changer when it comes to India's national security and the balance of power in the overall region, the Eurasia region, the Asia Pacific region. So let's understand why this technology, this test is going to be a game changer for the entire balance of power in the region. This video is brought to you by my course on geopolitics from first principles. It's about understanding what geopolitics is really about. It's understanding how hard power works and how the pecking order of the world is actually predicated upon, on what factors it is predicated upon. The link is in the description below. So what is MIRV technology and what is the Agni-5 ballistic missile? First of all, MIRV technology stands for Multiple Independently Targetable Reentry Vehicle. That's MIRV. And that is the new technology that India has tested on the Agni-5 ballistic missile. So what is MIRV? What does that mean? It means that a single missile can deliver multiple warheads. Typically, we're talking about nuclear warheads. That's what we typically use ballistic missiles for. So a single missile can have multiple warheads, which can range from 3 to 12 warheads encased in its fairing, in its payload fairing. And what happens is that once the missile, a ballistic missile, it goes along a parabolic trajectory. It is launched, it acquires a significant amount of speed, typically a Mach 20 to 25. It exits the atmosphere, then it re-enters the atmosphere, and then at a certain point in time, its payload opens up and multiple warheads come out of it, and they can be sent to impact multiple targets at different speeds, and the targets can be hundreds of kilometers apart. So a single missile can deploy and deliver multiple warheads from 3 to 12 warheads typically. Now, this is not a technology that has, it's not a very new technology. The Americans and the Soviets first tested a primitive or a rudimentary version of this technology in the 1960s, if I'm not mistaken. And today, a number of nations have this technology. The US obviously has it. The Russians have it. China, France, and the UK also has MIRV technology. The UK has American Trident II missiles that are MIRV capable. And now India has joined this club. So what does it do? It means that a single missile can deliver multiple warheads to different locations. And that obviously is a game changer, because when it comes to ballistic missile defense, if you have a missile that's incoming, then you can certainly try and shoot it down. It's like trying to shoot a bullet with another bullet. That's how fast the velocities are. And now if one missile can deploy multiple payloads, then it's going to be really hard to shoot that down, to shoot each payload down. And typically some of the payloads could be dummies. So some of the warheads could be dummy warheads, and you may try to shoot them down, and it's going to be essentially a waste of your time and resources. So what this does is that it gives the defender, the recipient of the package, very little time to react and try and neutralize the incoming warheads. So let me give you a very, very crude, rudimentary cricket analogy, sports analogy, cricket. In cricket, we know that there are fast bowlers, and the faster a bowler bowls, the more difficult it is for the batsman to play the ball. Now imagine that you're a really fast bowler and you're bowling the ball, and after 2/3 of the way, the ball is reaching towards the batsman, and suddenly it swings at a very late instance. So just before the ball reaches the batsman, it swings. That makes it very hard for the batsman to adjust and defend the ball or play his stroke. So that's kind of what MIRV does. After the missile re-enters the atmosphere, that's when it deploys multiple warheads. So it gives you very little reaction time. So the Agni-5 ballistic missile typically re-enters the atmosphere at about, let's say, about 6 to 7, maybe 8 kilometers per second. It's about Mach 24. That's 24 times the speed of sound. Okay, so the Agni-5 ballistic missile re-enters the atmosphere and its warheads impact the target at roughly around 8 kilometers per second. So re-entry of the atmosphere happens at about 100 kilometers above the Earth's surface. That's the boundary between the atmosphere and space, typically, the Kármán line, they call it. So it gives the defender about 12 to 13 seconds to take action against multiple incoming warheads, some of which could be dummy warheads. So that tells you how difficult a task it is for the defender to try and neutralize those targets. So that's why it's a game changer. It totally changes the rules of the game. And if you launch 5 such missiles, each carrying 10 warheads, it's going to be essentially impossible to defend against that. So that is what it does, because the re-entry speed of a ballistic missile is typically so high. For example, meteors that burn up in the Earth's atmosphere, they typically have a speed of between 12 to 40 kilometers per second. And this incoming ballistic missile Agni-5 will have a speed of about 8 kilometers per second. So that's a tremendous speed. It gives you very little time to adjust and defend. And that's why it's a game changer. So the question is, what is this Agni-5 missile? We know it's a ballistic missile, but what is its range like? So the range has not been disclosed. India has never given an official figure of what the missile's range is. Now, there is a lot of speculation about the range of this missile, Agni-5. It's believed to have a range of between 5,000 and 8,000 kilometers. Now, even with a 5,000 kilometer range, it brings much of Eurasia within its strike umbrella, so to say. All of China obviously is covered. If you have an 8,000 kilometer range, it essentially you can cover all of Australia depending on where you launch the missile for. It's not like Australia is an adversary. I'm just giving you an idea of the range. So depending on if you were to launch the Agni-5 missile, let's say from the Andaman Nicobar Islands, the southernmost island of Indian territory, then you could essentially cover the whole of Australia if you wanted to. It's not like we want to. China is definitely entirely within the reach of this missile. Beijing, of course, and other important potential targets. And if you were to launch the missile from the western side of India, the western coast of India, you could bring the whole of Europe into range, including London, whatever. Even South Africa, even most of Africa is within range of this missile. So this gives India a massive, strike range with MIRV capabilities. So it's almost impossible to defend against such an incoming missile. So then the question is, how long has India had this technology? Well, one could say that, look, ISRO, India's Space Research Organization, has had what we could call MIRV adjacent technology for quite some time. I remember there was this test, there was this launch of, I think, the PSLV rocket by ISRO in 2013, in which multiple satellites were launched at the same time on a single PSLV rocket. So what you do in this is that you launch the rocket and you place multiple satellites in very specific, precise orbits in one go. That's very much MIRV adjacent technology. And over time, India has had launches in which more than 100 satellites have been launched and precisely deployed in specific orbits. So that essentially is very similar to MIRV technology. Just replace those satellites, those nano satellites or whatever, with nuclear warheads, and you get essentially the same thing. And the PSLV, GSLV, whatever, they can be launched on ballistic trajectories, which means a re-entry trajectory, and you could have the same effect. So India has had this technology or a very similar technology for quite some time, and I am not quite sure if this is the first actual test of this technology, but India has chosen to announce this test, the latest test, in March this year. It's possible that other tests may have taken place, but India may have chosen not to announce that. So there have been previous tests of the missile, Agni-5 missile, that have had a 5,000 plus kilometer range going all the way into the southern Indian Ocean and so on. And it's quite possible that MIRV technology could have been tested at the time, but India may possibly not have chosen to announce that MIRV technology was tested. So I believe personally that India must have had this technology for quite some time, but now it has been announced. Now, what else can we take out of this? The other thing, one more thing we can understand or surmise from this announcement is that India has successfully miniaturized its nuclear warheads. Think back to the time when the Manhattan Project happened during the Second World War, and the Americans tested 2 nuclear weapons on Japanese territory, one in Hiroshima, one over Nagasaki. And those were very large weapons, very massive warheads that were deployed and tested over Japan. Those were massive things. But today, when it comes to America and nations like the US and the Russians, they have miniaturized warheads. Let me give you a very rough and not entirely accurate rule of thumb. 1 kiloton is roughly equal to 1 kilogram, roughly. So if you have a 100 kiloton warhead, whose explosive yield is 100 kilotons equivalent of TNT, then that would typically have a weight of around 100 kilograms, roughly. It's a very rough rule of thumb. It's not entirely exact, but you can take that as a rough guideline. So the Agni-5 missile has a payload capacity of between 2 to 4 tons, 2,000 to 4,000 kilograms of payload. So if you have a 100 kiloton warhead, that would roughly be 100, 200 kilos roughly, right? So you could have 10 such warheads in a 2,000 kilogram payload. And if you have a larger warhead, let's say you've not been able to miniaturize entirely, and maybe a 100 kiloton warhead is, let's say, 400 kilograms, even then you could have 10 such warheads in an Agni-5 missile. And depending on the amount of mass, the payload mass, the range may vary. So lighter payload mass may give the missile a longer range. Heavier payload mass may give the missile a shorter range, and that's typically how it goes. But we don't quite know what the range is. It could be between 5 to 8,000 kilometers. It's called an ICBM, Intercontinental Ballistic Missile. So its range could be around 8,000 kilometers, possibly even 10,000 kilometers. We don't quite know. But yeah, it's got a significant range, and it brings all of India's potential adversaries within its reach. So that's what we have to understand, that India has successfully been able to miniaturize its nuclear warheads. Now, what does this mean for India's nuclear doctrine? What is India's nuclear doctrine? So India's nuclear doctrine essentially has 2 components. The first component is that India will at all times maintain a credible minimum nuclear deterrent. So we will not stockpile too many nuclear warheads, thousands of them, but we will have enough to take care of our national security needs. So that is the first part of the nuclear doctrine, minimum credible nuclear deterrence. The second part of the doctrine is that we will not use nuclear weapons as a first strike options. We will not unilaterally use nuclear weapons, but we will use them as a second strike option. In case an unfriendly nation uses nuclear weapons against India, whether it's over Indian territory or against Indian armed forces anywhere, then India will retaliate with the nuclear option, and it's going to be a massive retaliation. It's not going to be a small retaliation. Once the nuclear threshold is breached against India, India will retaliate massively. And this also applies to the use of chemical weapons and biological weapons. So India needs a proper, credible second strike capability. And that's where MIRV can be a game changer, because a single missile can deliver between 3 to 12 warheads. So that is essentially, is very obviously a game changer when it comes to India's second strike capability. The other thing we have to understand is that the open source data that we have, the open source information that we have, says that India has about 150, 160, 164 nuclear warheads. Now let's say you're placing 5 nuclear warheads on a single Agni-5 missile. Then 10 missiles would be 50 warheads. 20 missiles, it's 100, 30 missiles, it's 150. So in that case, India would just be able to launch 30 missiles with 5 warheads each. So that essentially means, it implies that India will have to kind of increase the number of nuclear warheads it has in its stockpile in order to do multiple launches if needed. It's not like we want to do it. We never want to use nuclear weapons, but the option always has to be available and open. So it most likely, not most likely, it possibly means that India may increase the number of nuclear warheads in its stockpile. Maybe if the number is correct, if it's 160, then India may possibly double that. Maybe 200, maybe 300 or something like that. So that is another implication of this test. Now, who is this aimed at? Is India sending a message to a specific nation or a group of nations? Is India targeting a potential adversary by developing this technology? So when it comes to India's geographical region, we have 2 major threats. India, one is Pakistan, one is China. Pakistan is obviously a nuclear armed nation. It is a nation that's always on the brink of collapse, but it's always propped up by external forces as a very useful counterweight, counterbalance to India. Now, when it comes to a potential war with Pakistan, I don't think India would ever want to use ballistic missiles to fight a war with Pakistan, against Pakistan. Cruise missiles would do. The BrahMos missile is sufficient to deal with Pakistan. Pakistan is not a very large nation. The BrahMos missile can essentially cover the entire territory of Pakistan if it is ever needed. So I don't think the Agni-5 missile is meant for Pakistan. The real threat when it comes to India is obviously Beijing. It's China, and China is a much more powerful nation. Its hard power, if its hard power score is about 3.5 times that of India, maybe even 4 times that of India. So China is a significantly more powerful nation. Overall hard power, not just GDP, but overall hard power. So when it comes to a nation like that, India needs a credible nuclear deterrent, especially when China itself is a nuclear weapons power. China also, I believe, has the no first use doctrine, but you never know. You never know about that. So it's essentially to deal with China that this technology has been developed. But of course, it has a very large strike range, and all of Eurasia and much of Africa, much of Oceania also comes within the strike range of this missile. So it's good to have that, but it's mainly about counterbalancing China. And obviously the whole of China comes within the range of this missile. Now, what about ballistic missile defense capabilities? Does Pakistan have ballistic missile defense capabilities? I'm not sure Pakistan has that. It's very hard to develop the technology. India itself is in the process of developing BMD technology, ballistic missile defense technology, which is essentially shooting down an incoming ballistic missile with another missile. And we have the Prithvi exo-atmospheric defender and all that. We have a few missiles that have been tested over time, and there are certain measures in place within India. Does China have ballistic missile defense technology? Well, as far as I know, China doesn't have a very robust ballistic missile defense technology. They have obviously been working on that, but I'm not sure that they have a very credible BMD technology. They do have various Russian-made weapons systems, such as the S-300, the S-400 they also have. India also has the S-400. The S-400 is essentially about taking out multiple aerial targets, whether it is incoming fighter jets, whether it is cruise missiles, and possibly even some level of ballistic missile defense. But I'm pretty sure that it won't be able to take out MIRV warheads that are released in a large cluster and are aimed at multiple targets. It's almost impossible to do that using the S-400. Maybe the S-500 the Russians are developing could be better at defending against that. Possibly. We're not quite sure because data hasn't been released. So when it comes to China and Pakistan, it puts India in a very good place, especially vis-a-vis China. Does Pakistan have MIRV? I mean, the Pakistanis have been claiming that their Ababil or some missile has MIRV capabilities. Well, I'll tell you what, any large enough missile can be fitted with MIRV technology. So every missile, essentially, any ballistic missile typically is MIRV capable. But what you need to have is the actual technology, the MIRV technology. In Pakistan, unless the Americans or the Chinese have provided them, they probably do not have that technology. So that is the deal. So it significantly changes the strategic calculus, the nuclear deterrence calculus in the Asia Pacific region. It kind of puts India on a more even footing against China. China is obviously a major threat to India and all of its neighbors. China has territorial disputes with almost all of its neighbors. It's even reopened an old dispute with Russia. And when it comes to India and China, the entire India-Tibet border is undemarcated. India and China have held, I don't know, 21, 25, 38, I don't know how many rounds of talks, negotiations, but there's never any progress because the Chinese do not want to demarcate this boundary so as to keep India always under pressure. And there's always the possibility of some kind of war breaking out because you have about 200,000 soldiers on both sides facing off against each other along the entire undemarcated border. About 50,000 on each side could be there in the Ladakh sector itself. And there's a very long boundary that is undemarcated. So it's a tense situation, and India has been ramping up its border infrastructure development activities over the past decade, and that's obviously ruffled a lot of feathers in China, and that's why you have had all these clashes that have happened in recent times, including the Galwan clash, which was quite deadly. About 20 Indian soldiers died, and a large number of Chinese soldiers also died, between 40 to 100. We don't quite know because the figures haven't been released by the Chinese. So that is the deal. Now, what have the reactions been like? So that's how it changes the balance of power in the Asia Pacific region, especially between India and China. It puts India on a more even footing, and it gives India an advantage vis-a-vis China. The Chinese also have the MIRV technology, but India also has it now. So that kind of puts things into perspective and kind of balances things out more evenly. Now, what's been the reactions? The Chinese Global Times have put out an op-ed about this technology, saying that it doesn't really matter, it's not a big deal. But if it is not really a big deal, then why are you writing about it? It's clearly something that has ruffled feathers in China, and the Chinese are concerned. But they're trying to portray it as not a very major event, but clearly the Chinese are kind of ruffled. And the Western reaction has been typically condescending and what's his name? Derek Grossman, the guy from Rand Corporation, he has written that India has done this out of a sense of wanting to be in an elite club, out of a sense of wanting prestige and not much more. And some people say that it's going to do more harm than good. Excuse me, ballistic missiles and MIRV technology is supposed to do harm, not good. It's not a solar panel that we've developed. It's an offensive technology. So yeah, that's the deal. The reactions have been pretty predictable. The American reactions, the Chinese reactions. Other nations haven't really said much about it because it doesn't concern them. So that's overall how it is. So this technology is definitely a game changer when it comes to the entire strategic calculus in the Asia Pacific region, the nuclear deterrence, balance of power, all of that. And it gives India an advantage, and it gives India a sense of being on a more even footing with China. And it actually makes it less likely that the two nations will have a major war, because both nations will now stand to lose a lot if either ever breaches the nuclear red lines. So if there is a war between India and China, both nations are going to be extremely cautious. If there is a war, they'll try and keep it as a limited war, as limited as possible, and not have it expand beyond certain lines. So overall, it's good. It probably makes the situation more stable as opposed to less stable. When two powers that are adversaries have similar technologies and similar capabilities, it actually makes things more stable between the two nations. So that is what this entire thing is about. The MIRV test that India conducted, the Agni-5 missile. India has a number of ballistic missiles and a very significant missile program. We have the Prithvi missiles, we have the Agni missiles, Agni-2, Agni-3, Agni-4, Agni-5. There could be an Agni-6 also in development, which could be like a global strike missile. And there's also the submarine-launched missiles, like the K-14 and the K-4. Now, the MIRV technology, the MIRV system could be fitted on these K missiles as well. The K-14, which is a reasonably short-range missile, and the K-4, I'm not sure if it has been tested or what the status is, but obviously the MIRV technology could be fitted on that as well. So the K-4 missile is going to be a submarine-launched ballistic missile. It will probably be launched, if it ever is, from India's nuclear submarines. So once again, that gives India a very credible and a very significant second strike capability against whoever could be an adversary. So that's what this is all about. It completely changes the strategic balance of power in the region, and it is advantage India when it comes to the relationship or the adversarial relationship between India and China. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video very soon.